What I was wondering is, last night we had the mayor came and spoke to us, and he said that he was focused on education. Well, what at the state level, or what can you do at the state level to help him with the budget for all that spending that he can use on education?
Sure. Well, first of all, as state treasurer, we're not responsible for any spending, of course. We're managing the existing revenue that's coming in. Legislature makes those spending decisions, but a couple things the state overall can do. I mean, first of all, for many school districts, state revenue is about 25 to 30% of the revenue for that district. So the state funding is an important base to sort of equalize funding across school districts across our state to ensure that funding is equitable, and fully funding that foundation formula is a big step to doing that. So that's step one. The other piece is, as a state, we can set education policy that helps school districts try new things in terms of how they recruit teachers, how they hire individuals, how they develop learning tools for children. So I think there's both a financial piece but also a policy piece toward a state's investment in public education.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I just want to know your opinion on what is the role of unions in the United States?
You know, I grew up in a family in a neighborhood that had a lot of labor union members. My dad's a retired union carpenter. You know, my belief is that unions build a stronger economy here in Missouri and across the nation. And that ultimately, one of the keys to having a strong economy is having a strong middle class. And unions have provided an important role in doing that throughout history, and I think it's as relevant as it was then as it is today.
Thank you.
What did the student government at UMKC do to move you on to the future?
Sure. Well, I was at University of Missouri St. Louis, by the way, so
Okay, my bad.
that's okay. Cardinals. I think it did a tremendous amount. I mean, you know, when you run for office, whether you're running for student government, or whether you're doing what you're doing this week, whether you're running for political office for the first time at the state level, it's a little bit of a leap of faith. You have to jump off of that cliff not knowing where anyone's going to catch you along the way, right? So I think, you know, ultimately being taught that, you know, willingness to take that risk, to try your best, to be able to talk sincerely and authentically with people, I mean, those things, you know, you can't ever trade that experience. So it was an unbelievable experience for me.
Thank you.
Mr. Plunkett pointed out that you were the youngest treasurer in the last 100 years, and I was wondering if any of the other government officials looked down on you for that, or if you thought that they did.
I mean, I think being a young person in politics is a great thing. I think there's going to be many, many more opportunities, especially for all the young people here, to be involved in politics at a very young age. I think term limits has created that environment. So I feel that, you know, if anything, our more senior officials have, you know, treated me with a huge amount of respect, encouragement along the way, so it's been a benefit.
And at the onset of your speech, you talked about some very idealistic values, such as sense of civic duty. And I was just wondering, at the government level, what are you trying to do to promote that in your citizenry?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I think part of that is what you show every day on the job, how you perform your duties, right? When I came into office, I was elected as a Democrat. I sat down and worked with Republicans on a day-to-day basis to develop legislation that helps small businesses and farms, right? So we reached across party lines right away to find things that we could agree upon, to build consensus, to identify leaders in both parties who are willing to work together. So I think the number one thing you can do is try to find out what you have in common first before you start arguing about what you don't have in common, right? And I think that civic duty applies to all of us in our own lives in terms of building relationships with our peers here today, with others that we meet, whether we're elected to the school board or into the state house.
My question for you is, other than public services, what other things would be good for investing both long and short term at not only at a state but lower levels of government?
Sure. Repeat the question again if you would, please.
Sorry, I spoke a little fast. Other than public services, what other things would be good for investing both long and short term at not only a state level but lower levels of government as well?
Sure. What sort of investments will help create jobs and develop our economy?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that what I said in the speech, and is something I really believe, that there's really three areas where we can make a significant difference and impact. And I think one is infrastructure, so that's going to be highways and bridges, but that's also going to be other types of transportation, whether it be rail or air. When you're in the middle of the United States, it's critical that you compete from a logistics perspective. We have 8 states surrounding us, so having a first-class transportation system is something that allows Missouri to develop, not just a victory here or there, but a lasting competitive advantage. I think education is another key piece. That has a few pieces to it. First of all, that means excellence in elementary and secondary education, finding ways to invest in new ways to recruit more teachers into the profession, find ways to encourage teachers to come into the profession, but also in terms of funding and support for that, preschool programs, et cetera, I think make that huge difference. Accessibility at the higher education level is another piece of education. And then finally, I think, when I look at small businesses that I talk to on a day-to-day basis, creating an environment where people are attracted to come to Missouri and start businesses as entrepreneurs, to invest capital here is a sort of a third critical piece. And I think that takes some investment, that it also takes some changing policies. Thank you. Thank you.
I was wondering about the campaign process. Did you ever, you said you were down 300 until about midnight, so I was just wondering if you ever thought about tips on campaigning, like did you think, oh, I could have done this differently or could have done this differently?
Yeah, well, listen, everything, that's a good question. I think everything we do in life, we can always do better the next time, right? But that isn't how life works, right? So we got to find a way to just do it the best we can with the information that we have at that point. I think as far as a tip on me campaigning, I'd say you're going to get a lot of advice if you ever run for office from a lot of people, some of which know what they're talking about, some of them which don't. I think the best piece of advice that I can give you is make your own decisions and be authentic. Ultimately, your friends and neighbors that you're running for, if you're running for a state representative or school board seat, they want to elect somebody that they can believe in. And trying to only be yourself is a really important part of that. Not trying to be anyone that's not you is the most important advice I think I could give. Lots of other details. Hard work is a big part of that. But ultimately, you got to be yourself, work really hard, be sincere. Thank you.
Earlier you spoke of several natural disasters that have affected Missourians throughout the state, and I'm sure that many of us in this very room have been affected by those very disasters. I was wondering how the state can better allocate money to take care of those problems in the form of disaster relief.
Sure. Well, I think unfortunately, Missouri's had probably more lessons in disaster relief in the last 4 years than it has in the previous 20 before that in terms of the disasters that we face. And the number one thing that a state can do, obviously there's monetary relief and support, which means a lot, but remember a lot of this is coordinating resources so that it's done effectively and efficiently. One of the most frustrating things for someone who's in the middle of a disaster is the fact that they have all these sort of resources out there, but none of them are efficiently responding to what they need here and now, right? So I think finding ways to make sure that our state is positioned is from a logistical perspective, is a state that can adequately really coordinate those resources, whether we're dealing with tornadoes, flooding, whatever it might be, between the federal government, private sector, churches, etc. Being able to coordinate those resources so there's a one-stop shop for residents to be able to get relief is one of the most important things that we can do. And I think actually, if you look more back toward the experiences that we've had in Joplin, that we've had in southeast Missouri, that we've had in St. Louis, that we've had throughout the state, that is probably the most important and key sort of value-added piece that the state can do on a day-to-day basis.
Considering your experience in the state legislature, do you believe the states have the constitutional ability to nullify federal laws?
No. By the way, you're not going to get a lot of one-word answers from politicians, so enjoy it.
I noticed during your speech you put an emphasis on civic responsibility. What programs or techniques are in motion now to get young people from our generation involved, and how can we help out?
I think, first of all, I think there needs to be a national focus on this. General McChrystal, who's not in the military any longer, but obviously was and spent a long career there, just wrote a piece, I think in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times a couple weeks ago about this. And that is the idea that we have some sort of service requirement for our young people, whether they be in college or high school. That could be fulfilled by being in the military, but also could be fulfilled by other means of community service. I think a change in our culture to really encourage people to participate in some sort of community service, but some sort of a requirement that they fulfill that, whether it be through military or other means. And I think a state can help play a role that through the nonprofits that we have, the church-based organizations, and all of those sort of organizations to coordinate with the federal government. Thank you.
Here's my question for you. You mentioned several programs you instituted to help small businesses get off the ground. I'm wondering what tips for us here at Boise State in the small system can you give us for startup businesses, as well as what can the government do to help that happen?
Sure. Well, I think one thing that the government doesn't do very well necessarily is sort of pick and choose winners in helping start businesses, right? It involves us making sure that we create a stronger culture for capital, for people to move here that are interested in being entrepreneurs and starting businesses. So I think one piece is, and I worked on some legislation last year that does that, but we begin to create an environment throughout the state where we are willing to incentivize small businesses that are willing to locate here in Missouri. These are startup businesses that aren't yet bankable, that don't have the ability to go to ABC Bank and borrow money at this point, but they have real ideas and have made real progress on that. Finding ways to get them to locate here in Missouri and find Missouri, call Missouri home is an important piece of doing that. I think you have to develop a culture, you have to grow that culture, and I think once you have some successes, it helps other businesses that are starting for the first time. I think that's one of the most important things we can do. We can do that through policy to start, but ultimately it's about changing the culture.
I was just curious, what would be some key advice you'd give me and my fellow Boise Staters who are considering a career in government later in life?
Sure. Well, I mean, being here is step one, right? I mean, you're a step ahead of where I was. I didn't participate, didn't know about Boise State when I was growing up. So I think being here, being active, I think finding ways to, first of all, excel in school, but finding those sort of ways that you can reach out and do additional things, whether it be for the school or in the community. I think those extra types of service are really important because you learn a lot about people. You learn a lot about what communities need to grow. Those are small things that you can do here and now that begin to help you, I think, create that path for yourself. Volunteering on a campaign. If you find a candidate that you believe in, one of my early volunteers that I had on my second election ended up coming to work for me as my legislative director. 6 years later. So these sort of investments that you make in yourself now may not seem as important as you might think, but they really lead to much bigger opportunities.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Folks, thanks so much. You guys were wonderful.